Japan just activated the largest military transformation in its modern history, and China's response tells you everything. Beijing deployed reconnaissance aircraft over the East China Sea within 72 hours of Japan's announcement. This is because Tokyo isn't building a traditional defense force anymore. They're building something that could lock China's navy out of the Pacific. Here's what's really happening. For decades, China banked on one assumption: Japan would never rearm. Article 9 of Japan's constitution forbade it. Tokyo kept its military small, limited, and defensive. That gave Beijing freedom to expand across the East and South China Seas, building islands, deploying destroyers, and pressuring Taiwan. The plan, People's Liberation Army Navy, grew to over 370 ships, the world's largest naval force by hull count. And Japan watched with 54 destroyers and a handful of submarines. But something shifted in 2022. China's military flights near Japanese airspace hit record numbers: 1,700 intercepts in a single year. Ballistic missiles splashed down in Japan's exclusive economic zone during Taiwan drills. And Tokyo realized the old model, rely on the US, stay small, hope for stability, wouldn't work if Beijing decided to move on Taiwan. Japan sits 70 miles from Taiwan. Any conflict pulls them in whether they want it or not. Can Japan's new weapons actually neutralize China's naval advantage in a Pacific conflict? Japan isn't trying to match China ship for ship. They can't. Instead, they're deploying asymmetric systems designed to do one thing: make it impossible for China to operate freely in the waters between Taiwan and Japan's southern islands. We're talking standoff missiles that outrange Chinese destroyers. Submarine killer helicopters operating from islands Beijing thought were irrelevant. And a network of anti-ship batteries that turns Japan's island chain into a 900-mile no-go zone. China knows what this means. Control of the East China Sea, the gateway to the Pacific, suddenly becomes contested. Taiwan becomes harder to isolate, and the planned surface fleet, built for power projection, faces an opponent designed specifically to kill ships at range. But here's where it gets interesting. Japan isn't doing this alone, and the systems they're fielding aren't experimental. They're operational right now. Tokyo's first move shocked defense analysts across Asia. So, in December 2022, Japan announced it would acquire Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States, 400 of them, range over 1,000 miles. That's not a defensive weapon. That's a strike capability that can hit targets deep inside Chinese territory, from ships and submarines operating in Japanese waters. Here's why that matters. China's entire naval strategy depends on area denial, keeping US and allied forces away from Taiwan using long-range missiles launched from the mainland. The DF-21D and DF-26, their carrier-killer ballistic missiles, create a zone of roughly 1,200 miles where American carriers operate at extreme risk. China believed Japan couldn't strike back at the launchers. Now they can. But Tomahawks are just the beginning. Japan is also deploying the Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, a homegrown weapon system with a range exceeding 600 miles, up from 120 miles in its original version. These aren't defensive coastal batteries anymore. They're offensive strike systems, capable of hitting Chinese warships operating near Taiwan or Chinese ports across the East China Sea. The cost advantage is brutal. Each Type 12 missile costs roughly $3 million. A Chinese Type 055 destroyer, Beijing's most advanced warship, costs $920 million. Japan can field over 300 missiles for the price of one destroyer. In a saturation attack, even advanced Chinese air defenses get overwhelmed. Will China risk billion-dollar warships in waters where dozens of Japanese missiles can reach them? Drop your prediction below. China operates around 60 submarines, including 6 nuclear-powered ballistic missile subs, carrying JL-3 missiles capable of hitting the continental United States. Those submarines need to break out into the Pacific to threaten Guam, Hawaii, or the West Coast. There are only a few passages they can use, deep channels between Japan's islands. Japan just made those passages unpassable. Tokyo deployed the SH-60K anti-submarine helicopter across its southern island chain, Okinawa, Miyako, Ishigaki. These aren't transport birds. They carry dipping sonar, sonobuoys, and Type 97 torpedoes designed specifically to kill submarines in shallow water. Here's the kicker. Japan operates over 70 of these helicopters, one of the largest sub-hunting fleets in the world. China has nothing comparable in those waters, but helicopters need platforms. So Japan converted its Izumo-class helicopter destroyers, really light aircraft carriers, into forward operating bases for anti-submarine warfare. These ships can loiter for weeks in the Philippine Sea or East China Sea, launching helicopter patrols around the clock. Chinese submarines trying to slip through now face a detection grid they can't avoid. The numbers tell the story. In wargame simulations run by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Japanese anti-submarine forces detected and tracked over 80% of Chinese submarines attempting passage through the Miyako Strait. Detection means targeting. Targeting means kills. And there's one problem nobody's talking about. China's submarine force is loud, noisier than US or Japanese boats. The plan knows this. That's why Beijing is pouring resources into quieter designs. But those won't deploy in significant numbers until the 2030s. Right now, Japan has the advantage, and they're pressing it. Before we dive into the next section, comment your guess. Can China's submarine fleet break through Japan's detection grid in a real conflict? Japan's southernmost islands were always strategically important, but nobody thought they'd become military bases. These are small, mostly civilian islands. Yonaguni sits just 68 miles from Taiwan. Miyako is a tourist destination. Ishigaki has 50,000 residents and one small airport. Not anymore. Japan is fortifying these islands with anti-ship missile batteries, radar stations, and rapid response forces. The plan is simple. Turn the entire Ryukyu Island chain into an unsinkable aircraft carrier. And Chinese ships trying to enter the Pacific from the East China Sea now face missile threats from multiple directions. Land-based batteries from the islands, ship-launched missiles from Japanese destroyers, and air-launched weapons from F-15J fighters operating out of Okinawa. Here's the part that kept Chinese planners up at night. These islands create overlapping fields of fire. A Chinese destroyer operating 150 miles east of Taiwan is now within range of missiles from Yonaguni, Miyako, and potentially Ishigaki, plus naval vessels and aircraft. Even if Chinese air defenses shoot down 70% of incoming missiles, the sheer volume guarantees hits. One hit mission kills a destroyer. 2 hits sink it. But there's a deeper game being played. By militarizing these islands, Japan forces China to strike Japanese territory if it wants to neutralize the threat. That triggers the US-Japan Mutual Defense Treaty. An attack on Japan is an attack on the United States. Beijing gambles on a limited Taiwan operation, suddenly becomes a war with the US and Japan simultaneously. The geography is unforgiving. The Miyako Strait, the widest passage between Japan's islands and the main route for Chinese ships into the Pacific, is only 155 miles across. Japan doesn't need a massive fleet to control it. They just need enough missiles to make passage suicidal. China tested this in August 2024, sailing a carrier strike group through the strait during live fire drills near Taiwan. Japan scrambled aircraft, tracked every ship, and simulated missile lock-ons continuously. The message was clear: we see you, and we can hit you. Which system wins? China's naval air defenses or Japan's saturation missile tactics? Comment your top 3 reasons below. Beijing's initial reaction was dismissive. The state media called Japan's buildup provocative and destabilizing, but actions tell a different story. China accelerated production of the Type 055 destroyer, launching 6 in 3 years. They deployed additional fighter squadrons to eastern coastal bases. and they began construction of a new class of ballistic missile submarine designed specifically for quieter operation. But here's where everything changed. Japan announced in 2023 that defense spending would double by 2027 from 1% of GDP to 2%, roughly $80 billion annually. That's not maintenance budgets. That's procurement funding for long-range strike missiles, additional submarines, and expanded radar networks. By 2027, Japan will field one of the most lethal anti-access/area denial systems in the world, purpose-built to counter China. China's window to act, if it ever intended to, is closing. Every year, Japan gets stronger in the one domain that matters most for a Taiwan scenario: sea control around the first island chain. And Tokyo isn't stopping. Plans are underway for railgun prototypes, hypersonic missile development, and expanded satellite reconnaissance. The country that swore off offensive military power in 1947 is now building one of the most advanced strike networks in Asia. The question now isn't whether Japan can contest Chinese naval operations. It's whether China can still achieve its objectives with Japan actively opposing them. Can Japan's new weapons neutralize China's naval advantage? The answer is yes. Within 600 miles of Japan's coastline, Japan can't project power to the South China Sea or challenge China in its home waters. But they don't need to. Taiwan is 70 miles from Japanese territory. The entire potential conflict zone sits within range of Japan's new missile systems, submarine forces, and island-based defenses. China's navy is larger, but size doesn't matter when you're operating inside an opponent's missile envelope. The plan built a blue water fleet for open ocean dominance. Japan built a weapons system to deny access to those same oceans. In confined waters near Taiwan, that's a winning strategy. Here's what you need to remember. First, Japan's transformation fundamentally changes Chinese military planning. Any Taiwan scenario now requires Beijing to fight Japan simultaneously, or strike Japanese territory first and risk American intervention. Neither option is attractive. China's entire calculus depended on Japan staying neutral or responding slowly. That assumption is dead. Tokyo can now threaten Chinese naval operations from day one of any conflict, forcing the plan to split its focus between Taiwan and Japanese missile batteries. That dilutes combat power and complicates logistics when Beijing needs maximum concentration of force. Second, this isn't a short-term shift. Japan's defense industrial base is ramping up production of missiles, submarines, and electronics. By 2030, Tokyo will have one of the most modern and lethal militaries in the world, built specifically for this mission. We're talking about production lines, not prototypes. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries is already expanding missile manufacturing capacity. Kawasaki Heavy Industries is building additional submarine construction facilities. This is industrial-scale rearmament with political support across Japan's major parties. The funding is locked in. The momentum is irreversible. Third, the arms race is accelerating. China will respond. More submarines, better air defenses, and hypersonic anti-ship missiles. But every dollar Beijing spends countering Japan is a dollar not spent elsewhere. Japan just forced China into a two-front naval competition: the US in the Pacific and Japan in the East China Sea. Beijing's defense budget, while large, isn't unlimited. Resources committed to defeating Japanese missile networks can't simultaneously fund operations in the South China Sea or modernization programs for the Air Force. Japan created a strategic dilemma with no clean solution. What comes next? Japan is already coordinating with the Philippines and Australia on overlapping defense networks. If those countries adopt similar anti-ship strategies, missiles, submarines, island fortifications, China faces a 2,000-mile defensive arc from Japan to the South China Sea. Manila is exploring coastal defense missiles. Canberra is expanding its submarine fleet to 12 boats. And each nation that adopts Japan's model adds another layer of complexity to Chinese naval operations. Control of the Western Pacific, which Beijing considered inevitable 5 years ago, is now genuinely contested. The era of uncontested Chinese expansion just ended. So, can Japan's new weapons neutralize China's naval advantage in a Pacific conflict? The answer is yes, and Beijing knows it. Tokyo turned a defensive posture into an offensive capability, and they did it with systems operational today, not theoretical weapons a decade away. Now it's your turn. Which side wins in your wargames scenario? Comment your top 3 reasons below, and the best ones get pinned and featured in the next video. The question now isn't whether Japan can challenge China. It's how China responds when their biggest strategic assumption, a passive Japan, just collapsed.